Glorify. The Rules Committee will come to order. We're here for consideration of two measures. HJ Res 118 from the Ways and Means and Education and Workforce Committee. We're happy to welcome both committee chairs, gentlemen. It's great to see you. And Mr. Levin, wonderful to see you. Thanks for joining us. And is Mr. Andrews coming? I hope we'll see Mr. Andrews join us as well. Without objection, any prepared statement that any of you have will appear in the record in their entirety, and we welcome your summary. Let's begin with our very good friend, the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means, Mr. Camp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On July 12th of this year, the Department of Health and Human Services issued an information memorandum saying that they'd accept and approve applications from states seeking to waive the work requirement that's been central to the success of the temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, cash welfare program. The administration issued its memorandum.
Is that green light on there?
It is.
It is. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Act like you really like the microphone.
The administration issued its memorandum despite the fact that the section of the Social Security Act containing the welfare work requirements, Section 407, is not among those that any administration, Republican or Democrat, has the authority to waive. The work requirement, which stipulates that 50% of a state's welfare caseload must work or prepare for work, was a key part of the bipartisan 1996 welfare reform signed into law by President Clinton. A summary of those reforms, Ways and Means Committee Print 104-15, prepared by committee staff immediately following the law's enactment, is very clear that work requirements may not be waived, and it states, and I'm quoting here, waivers granted after the date of enactment of the 1996 law may not override provisions of the TANF law that concern mandatory work requirements, end quote. Again, despite the administration's claims, I can assure you as one of the authors of that legislation and member of the conference committee, it was our intention that the work requirements not be waived. The history of welfare reform policy since 1996 has been consistent with this understanding. Today, GAO released a report that found that HHS has never before issued any TANF waivers in the history of the program, including involving the TANF work requirements. More importantly, they found that when previous HHS secretaries were asked about the possibility of waiving work requirements, HHS responded, and I'm quoting here, "The department does not have the authority to waive any of these provisions," end quote. That was the conclusion of the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, and at least previously the Obama administration. When it comes to welfare work requirements, I guess we can say President Obama was against them before he was for them, before he was against them. Additionally, the July 12th memorandum from HHS was not submitted to Congress for review as required by law. I asked the Government Accountability Office, GAO, to review this matter as well, and on September 4th, they confirmed that the HHS memorandum qualifies as a rule and is therefore subject to review and potential disapproval under the Congressional Review Act. The Congressional Research Service agreed with that finding. The action is a rule according to them as well. So not only has the administration attempted to exercise authority they don't have, they've done so in a manner that does not comply with the law. As a result, Chairman Klein, who chairs the Education Workforce Committee, we share jurisdiction over the welfare work requirements. Congressman Jim Jordan and I introduced HJ Res 118, and the resolution disapproves of the administration's attempt to undermine the welfare work requirements and would prevent the implementation of the HHS guideline or guidance to dismantle the work provisions that are a very critical part of the law. Both Ways and Means and Education Workforce approved HJ Res 118 last Thursday. The work requirement and other bipartisan 1996 reforms to the welfare program have led to more work, higher earnings, less welfare dependence, fewer impoverished low-income Americans. Employment of single mothers increased by 15% from 1996 to 2000, and it remains higher today than in 1996 after two recessions. At the same time, welfare caseloads have declined 57%. The American people strongly believe that those who are able should work in exchange for receiving federal benefits. A recent survey revealed that 83% support a work requirement as a condition for receiving welfare. The best way out of poverty is a job, And it's critical that our laws both foster job creation as well as ensure that welfare is always a pathway to work. That's what this legislation is about, ensuring that work remains a part of the TANF cash welfare program. As the 1996 reforms intended, I urge this committee's support for that goal and this important resolution to achieve it. And thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I'll be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Let's go to Mr. Levin, and then we'll go to the...
Thank you. Hello to all of you. I don't think I'll spend time arguing about the process issues. There's some disagreement about that. We think that the statements of the chairman are incorrect, basically. I might mention that the past requests were not for demonstration projects, which is true of the purpose of this guidance. So we can get caught up in discussion of process, but that would be a mistake because that's not what this resolution is really all about. What this resolution does is represent a political attack searching for a policy basis that is simply not there. That political attack is in ads. And there's a search here for a policy basis. A host of independent fact checkers have said the premises behind this bill is flat out false. Independent checkers, using such phrases as, I quote, pants on fire and four Pinocchios. Even the lead Republican staffer in charge of drafting the 96 law, Ron Haskins, has said the charges that led to this bill are baseless. That's Ron Haskins, with whom I and others worked on this reform in 96. I did so as a member of the conference committee. President Clinton, who signed welfare reform into law, has completely debunked the misinformation about the recent effort to help states increase the employment of welfare recipients, and that's what the guidance from HHS is all about. Here are the facts. Any demonstration project allowed under the guidance announced by HHS would have to be designed to increase the employment of TANF recipients, would be subject to rigorous evaluation, and would be terminated if it failed to meet employment goals. It is important to note that nothing in the waiver authority, nothing, would change the current 5-year federal limits on TANF benefits or the fixed funding levels now provided to states under the TANF program. The administration announced the demonstration authority after consultations with state officials, after consultation with them, who believe they can do a better job of moving welfare recipients into work if provided additional flexibility. I remember a time when Republicans supported state flexibility. In fact, not too long ago, Republicans were supporting much broader welfare waivers than now proposed by the administration. The Congressional Research Service confirms that House Republicans passed 3 bills between 2002 and 2005 that would, in quotes, that would have had the effect of allowing TANF work participation standards to be waived. If this resolution's only flaws was that it was based on pure politics, even worse, impure politics, it would be bad enough. But the measure would also impede states from taking innovative steps to move more people from welfare to work. That's a step in the wrong direction, this measure. I therefore urge the committee to save floor time, not report out this bill, but instead try to report out bills that would create jobs in this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman Clark. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that Chairman Camp laid the case out very well. One of the authors of the 1996 bill has been working on this for a long time. I've got a written statement for the record. I would like to submit that for the record. We believe that this is another overreach by this administration. It's clearly an effort to bypass Congress by calling a rule an information memorandum. We are concerned that the definitions of employment matter. That was a large part of what happened in the 2005 reauthorization, to make sure employment was sufficiently defined, that you couldn't use bed rest and other things. So it's a little bit disingenuous to say that, well, this is going to increase employment. Maybe if you redefine employment to include those sorts of things. So we think that's a very, very important piece, Section 407. We want to see it in place. We would like the committee to report this out as a closed rule. You know, it's very important under the Congressional Review Act as it goes forward to the Senate. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I did want to begin by expressing my admiration for my friend and classmate, the Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, for his selfless and courageous service in the face of his health struggles, which he will prevail upon, and know he has the prayers and best wishes of everyone on both sides of the aisle with him. 103 days from now, if the Congress doesn't act, every American who pays income taxes, I guess that's 53% or thereabouts,
So weird.
is going to get a tax increase. Real estate agents, nurses, teachers, truck drivers. And there's going to be an across-the-board cut that will hurt our defense of our country and many other programs like the National Institute of Health and the FBI and border security and all kinds of other things if the Congress doesn't act. One of the major rating services last week indicated they would probably lower the country's bond rating if the Congress doesn't act, which would have the effect of raising mortgage rates, car loan rates, reducing employment. It would be a very bad thing. My understanding is that the plan for this week is to conduct some votes until Friday and then go home until after Election Day. I think we should stay and deal with the so-called fiscal cliff before the election, not after. But it's astonishing to me that in the 2.5 days we're going to have before we leave, that we're going to spend some of the time disapproving a policy that doesn't exist. The premise of this bill that will go before the House is that the administration has decided to weaken or even do away with the work requirement under the welfare reform law that I voted for in 1996. This is not so. I have in my hand the document that is the subject of this resolution. We're disapproving. And I want to read from it a section on the second page. But before I do, I want to describe the process that would actually happen here. The Secretary of Health and Human Services has said that governors may, if they choose, ask for waivers from the work requirement in order to achieve certain goals that their states do that enhance the number of people moving from welfare to work. Thus far, 2 governors have made written requests to have such waivers considered. One is the Republican governor of Utah. The other is the Republican governor of Nevada. And when those considerations are taken under consideration by the department, here's the standard that the Secretary intends to use. I'm quoting. HHS is committed to ensuring that any demonstration projects approved will be focused on improving employment outcomes. In English, what that means is more people have to be working under the alternative rather than started before. So, for example, the state of Nevada has made the observation that very often when people get short-term work, if they don't have child care for their children or transportation to get to work or proper job training, they very often lose the job and wind up back on public assistance. So Nevada has talked about a 6-month delay for certain people in the work requirement so they can get the proper kind of training and the proper kind of family support so they'll get a job and keep it for the long term, which is what I thought the goal was here. But I want to say this again, that this document explicitly says that the department won't approve any waivers for anyone unless the outcome would be more people moving from welfare to work, not fewer. This is not a relaxation of the work requirement. It's a strengthening of the work requirement. I would say one other thing for the record, that the Committee on Education and the Workforce has considered the question of loosening the work requirement, and the majority passed a bill that does exactly that. A few months ago, the committee marked up a bill that, it's a little complicated, but here's what it does. It says that if a state wants to run its TANF program through the Welfare to Work program, through the rules of the Workforce Investment Act, they can do that. And so the rules that will apply to taking this welfare reform money would be the rules under the Workforce Investment Act, not the welfare law. The Workforce Investment Act has no work requirement for welfare recipients. So if you want to disapprove weakening the welfare to work requirement, you ought to disapprove that vote, because that's what that did. I frankly think that the agenda this week ought to be focused on the fiscal cliff this country is about to fall off in 103 days, the impact that would have on the people of our country, and not on this obvious campaign squabble that I don't think merits the time of the House of Representatives. I thank you.
Thank you very much. By the way, committee, I believe, as expressed by Chairman Dreyer several weeks ago, as we accepted you, Mr. Chairman, to be before us, we wish you the very best.
Well, thank you.
We're delighted that you are back with us.
Well, thank you.
Today. And as Mr. Andrews noted, and I think everybody on this committee, we're wishing you not only the best, but we're delighted that you're here with us.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks.
And that was expressed at the Ways and Means Committee.
Yes.
And,
Thank
will
you.
be further expressed tomorrow, as the chairman knows.
Well, thank you.
We got a little gift.
Isn't that great, you know, to
I hope.
It has the Detroit Tigers.
Oh, I see. Good.
I'm sorry I scored.
Good.
Okay, thank you very much. Mrs. Fox?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think some of the comments that are made by our colleagues, particularly on the other side of the aisle, beg for some response. The first I would say is that if there's no problem with the memorandum that was issued by HHS, then I can't understand why you all would object to our passing this bill. If you say that it's not going to weaken the work requirements, then passing something that says the work requirements can't be weakened should strengthen that. But the other thing that I think we have to deal with, and Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record I don't think anybody else has done it, the letter from the GAO. I don't believe the chairman mentioned that. I think he referred to it, but did not mention.
Without exception, be entered to the record.
But it clearly states in here that what the administration is trying to do violates law. It's a rule. The memorandum that was issued is considered a rule by the GAO and is subject to the jurisdiction of the Congress. I think, as I believe either our chairman have alluded to or have said, this is just another attempt by the administration to get around the rules that exist for the administration. And I think it's very appropriate that we take the action that we're taking. I'd also like to say, in response to the gentleman from New Jersey saying, if Congress does not act, then we face a fiscal cliff. I think it would be more appropriate if the gentleman would say if the Senate does not act, because if my memory serves me right, the House has acted to make sure that we don't go off this fiscal cliff. And as much as you and your colleagues would like to make the House responsible for all the bad things happening in this country right now, we simply aren't going to accept that. It's the Senate that is the problem in this country right now. As the gentleman from New Jersey knows, we've sent multiple bills over to the Senate, and they just die in the Senate because the Senate's taking no action. So the fiscal cliff to which you refer is one that's been created by the administration and created by the Senate. We've done our jobs here, and we'll continue to do our jobs, and this is a part of our job. We're not wasting the time of the people here. I've said it before, and I will say it over and over and over again. The Constitution is a wonderful document. We just celebrated Constitution Day on Monday. It is no accident that Article 1, Section 1 is about the House of Representatives and about the duties and responsibilities of the House of Representatives. Our founders understood that there was great danger in having an overreaching executive branch, and that's what we've got in this administration. And it's up to this House, and it's also up to the Senate, which is not doing its job, to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Will the gentlelady yield?
When I finish.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I think we're doing our job, and I think the Republicans in this House are doing a very good job of saying to the administration, you may want to proceed in the way that you have been operating, disregarding the Constitution, disregarding the will of the American people, but as the people's House, we are not going to stand by silently and let that happen, as the Senate is doing. So I think we're doing our job, and I hope the gentleman from New Jersey will call the attention of the Senate to the fact that it isn't doing its job. And as one of the authors of the WIA bill, I have to defend it, and I would welcome the chairman of the committee to speak up on it, since he hasn't had an opportunity to speak since the gentleman from New Jersey made his comments. The WIA bill is designed to bring efficiency and effectiveness to work programs that aren't really good work programs. They have not been effective. And giving an opportunity to the states to run effective programs is a smart thing for us to be doing. And does it do away with work requirements in the TANF bill? No, I don't think so, Mr. Andrews. But I again would encourage the gentleman from New Jersey to not talk about Congress not acting when he means the Senate not acting. We're the House of Representatives, proudly so, the People's House, and we have taken action.
The gentlelady would yield.
I will yield.
I thank her, and I always enjoy our work together. There is a certain historic accuracy to the gentlelady's comments about the inadequacy of the Senate. I think it's been proven throughout our history. But I think in this instance that her story is incomplete. Yeah, the House passed legislation which I think meekly punts the fiscal cliff forward just a little bit, but the Constitution also says, as the gentlelady knows, that for a law to be written, there has to be compromise between the two legislative branches and a signature from the President. And the fact of the matter is neither body, neither the Senate nor the House, has put on the floor a real, true, and comprehensive solution to this fiscal cliff problem. And I think that that's the reality. Finally, I would say about the Workforce Investment Act, The Workforce Investment Act bill that the committee reported out gives states the opportunity to run all of their TANF money, their welfare money, through the Workforce Investment Act rules. It explicitly supplants the rules under the TANF statute with the rules under the WIA statute, the Workforce Investment Act. Nowhere in the rules of the Workforce Investment Act is there a work requirement. So it's clear that the effect of the legislation that the gentlelady advocated for, perhaps inadvertently, but the effect of the legislation is to abolish the work requirement for welfare recipients in states that would take advantage of such a thing. Again, I know we disagree about that. I think what we ought to agree on, though, is that in the 103 days that remain before this fiscal cliff, there should be a serious negotiation with the leaders of the Senate, the White House, and the leaders of this House to avoid that problem. I thank the gentlelady.
But, John Howard, you referred to me. I'll be very brief. You know, you said, why not pass this bill? It essentially repeals the demonstration project guidance. And governors have asked for flexibility. Republicans in this House introduced bills to give governors that flexibility. You want to send all the Medicaid dollars back to governors. You want to repeal a provision for demonstration projects that must meet certain criteria, including increase the number of people who move from welfare to work. That is frightfully inconsistent. There's difference of opinion about the GAO guidance. There's been that for years. But you're being very inconsistent now saying an effort to give some flexibility under very restricted circumstances to the governors should be repealed. In terms of the bills you passed through the House, including the budget bill sponsored by Mr. Ryan, the people of this country will judge. We're glad to have them look over Mr. Ryan's legislation, and we'll see what the judgment is. I have a strong idea they'll reject that guidance from him. But look, the main thing is you're appealing guidance that allows some flexibility to governors if it leads to more people going to work. So why repeal that? Why repeal that?
Thank you, Mr. Levin, for your brevity. Mr. Camp.
Well, if I could just briefly say, the problem here is that this guidance has the force of law if we do nothing. And this was a critical part of the welfare bill in a bipartisan way. The work requirements were an integral part of the 96 reforms. To have an agency with an informational memorandum change a significant part of that law without coming to Congress is, I think, a huge mistake. And so what we're saying is, and GAO and CRS has backed that up, and I want to make sure that both GAO memorandums are in the record, not just the September 4th, but also today's memorandum, which says that no HHS secretary has ever sought this sort of authority. But what they really need to do is, if they want to do this, publish a rule. Go through the proper procedure, notify the Congress so that we can then be a part of what it is they're trying to do. And look, we're trying to protect the congressional prerogative here. And as I said in committee, I've been in the minority twice, in the majority twice. And this is something we frankly should be uniting behind, is protecting the congressional prerogative on a significant piece of legislation. So rather than have unelected people tell us what the law is, I think on an integral piece of significant legislation, this should come to the Congress. And it is a rule. They didn't follow the law. And because of that, we need to move forward with this resolution.
I thank the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee for restating in a much better way what I was trying to say very clumsily, which is it is the prerogative of the Congress, and undermining that is the wrong thing to do. And I think you're absolutely right. both Democrats and Republicans should jealously guard the prerogative of the Congress against the encroachment by the administration. I wonder if the chairman of the Education Committee wanted to respond at all.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding just a minute. I don't want to lose focus on what we're here for today. I think Chairman Camp has put it very well. We're here to talk about an action that the administration took that bypasses congressional intent and congressional prerogative, and taking steps to do something about that. That's what we're trying to do here. That's what this little resolution, it's not a 2,700-page, 200-page, 50-page bill, it's a little 2-page resolution that says we disapprove of this action, and if it's necessary to, the Secretary of HHS needs flexibility, wants to provide flexibility, they should do it by more formal rulemaking, as Chairman Camp said. And then I know that the Workforce Investment Improvement Act is indeed near and dear to your hearts. I disagree with Mr. Andrews' summary of that, because clearly it was not the purpose to delete or gut the work requirement. The purpose, as the gentlelady said, was to reduce inefficiencies in the administration of these programs, to reduce administrative inefficiencies. I will say that as this bill were to move forward under regular order, if there were continue to be confusion, then in an open process we have here, we can address that to make sure when legislation passes this House that any confusion that might exist is cleared up, because we absolutely want to do nothing to weaken the work requirement. Put in 1996, strengthened in 2005. I think Republicans have been very clear about that as we go forward. Part of our concern here is that we have an information memorandum which has the effect of law, of making a rule. We think there's a great deal of confusion about whether or not it weakens work requirements, and we ought to stop that rather than let that occur where you have a weakening work requirements. I yield back.
I thank the chairman of the Education Workforce Committee for clarifying those issues. Ms. Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Oh, how I wish we were doing the ag bill here while we're here this week. There's such a crying need for it, and I'm worried, as everybody else is, about the fiscal cliff. I hear that everywhere I go. Personally, I'm very disappointed we were not able to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act as one of the co-authors of that bill. I know how much good that it's done, cut violence in the first 10 years in half, and that was a hard-won battle, and I hate to see it just let it slip away. But we are here today, I think, with an answer to a problem that doesn't exist. At least do all four of you, the two of you gentlemen, let's say Mr. Klein and Mr. Camp, you actually believe that what Mr. Andrews read was incorrect, and that what happened here was a weakening and not a strengthening of work requirements?
Yes.
You do believe that?
I do believe it's a weakening.
Would you give me the grounds for that?
I do believe it's a weakening because it opens up a possibility of a complete redefining of what employment is. And you're using, apparently, employment exit measures that are not, have been shown to be not a good measure of people actually getting back to work. The reason it was made very clear in 2005 was because we had some very strange definitions of employment out there that we need to clear up. We want to make sure that those stay there, and we believe that this is an overreach of authority for the Secretary of HHS and may indeed lead to weakening those work requirements.
Is it simply because of the waiver itself, or what you think you read into the waiver that you've come to that conclusion?
We believe, first, that you can't waive those requirements under Section 407, and there's some dispute about that. But
even to strengthen them?
Even to strengthen them. Mm-hmm. We believe you can't waive those work requirements, and we are concerned that you may have new definitions in a pilot project that of employment that will be very different from what Mr. Camp and the original authors of this, and those of you who were here for the reauthorization, those of us here for the reauthorization in 2005.
Mr. Andrews? Mr. Andrews, yes, certainly, Mr. Lee.
That is a complete misconstruction, complete in answer to your question. I served on the committee. I think you simply have to listen to this Republican staffer. Any flexibility would have to lead to more people working. That's in the guidance. And here's what he had to say. I quote, "I don't see how you can get to the conclusion that the waiver provision undermines welfare reform." This is Ron Haskins, end quote. I continue. "There is no plausible scenario under which it really constitutes a serious attack on welfare reform. First of all, the states have to apply individually for waivers, and they have to explain in detail why this approach would lead to either more employment or better jobs for people who are trying to stay off welfare and get off welfare. That's why those independent observers have essentially said it's false. What's happening here is there's an ad on television that every independent observer has said, pants on fire or four Pinocchios. And this is a bill that intends to give some credibility to a false ad. That's really what this is all about. This is politics. I think pure politics, as I said earlier, impure politics, that should not be brought into this institution. As you said, we face so much undone work. We're leaving without a farm bill. We're leaving without action on other legislation, including violence against women. And now, tomorrow, the proposal is to take up a bill that essentially is an effort to give some credibility to a political ad that every observer says has no credibility. And Mr. Haskins, with whom we worked, the Republican staff person, says is not believable. That's what you're doing if you pass this bill out of the Rules Committee, purely and simply.
Mr. Levin, I agree with you, and I think that what we're doing here, there's no question about it. You correctly categorize this as a purely political move. We know that that has been the whole notion that the president did something that was dreadful. It was been completely discredited by people on both parties. Mr. Andrews, you wanted to speak.
Yes, ma'am. Some of the redefinition of work issues that the chairman raised, we talked about the markup. And when there's leave to submit for the record, I'd like to submit for the record with the chairwoman's consent.
Without objection.
Thank you, ma'am. Documents from the Secretary of Health and Human Services that specifically state that some of the activities that the chairman mentioned would not count as a work requirement. That's clearly the intention here. But I want to come back to a point that Mr. Levin made and the gentlelady from New York made. I don't have many farmers in my district, but all the ones I do are baffled by the fact that the Congress cannot move a farm bill. And
angry.
And they're angry and they're worried about the future of their families. And my sense is that if I'm not mistaken, there was a farm bill reported out of the Agriculture Committee with a super majority, with a huge vote in favor of it. And the Senate moved legislation by a similar super majority. And look, one can quarrel with what's in it and vote yes or vote no, but I'm astonished by the fact that we're going to leave town Friday until after the election, with not even considering that, and take valuable time tomorrow on debating what really amounts to almost a metaphysical question, that if someday some governor asked for a waiver that looked a certain way, and if the secretary looked at it a certain way, that maybe it would have an effect that we don't want. And the rule itself, the memorandum itself, lays out that the secretary will only grant waivers if the number of people working goes up, not down. But my goodness, we're going to spend valuable time arguing about a hypothetical question when America's rural communities are suffering without a farm bill, America's cities are suffering, laying off teachers and firefighters and police officers, America's middle class is imploding under a significant economic crisis. I find it to be an inappropriate use of our time.
Could I also
Certainly,
comment.
Mr. Camp.
I just wanted to associate myself with the remarks of Chairman Klein and say that part of the confusion stems from the fact that the information memorandum does not mention this 20% requirement. And it was in a letter, a follow-up letter to Senator Hatch and myself, that the Secretary asserted this was part of this informal action. So even GAO has said, and the fact checkers, which my friend from Michigan raised, gave President Clinton, I think, 2 or 3 Pinocchios for saying this was in the information memorandum. It wasn't. And so there's a lot of confusion about, will this strengthen the work requirement or not? And because it's unclear, knowing how agencies act, I think you have to assume that this will weaken the work requirement, because the initial information memorandum did not have any of those other follow-up benchmarks or requirements in it. So as a result of that, again, as I said, because it's a major law, this is a major change in legislation, we need to have a rule, and that's why we need to pass this resolution.
Would the gentlelady yield
Yes.
for a moment?
Indeed.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Mr. Camp to follow up a little bit on something Mr. Andrews said. Mr. Andrews is talking about hypothetical situations. But it is true, as you and Mr. Klein have pointed out, we're talking about a real memorandum which was issued, correct? So there's a real memorandum out there, and what this resolution is about is not something hypothetical, but is about a real memorandum on which we have now 2 rulings saying it is inappropriate. Is that correct? Yes. So that gets us back to the issue at hand, I believe, which I think we sometimes have to continue to do because we get all these extraneous comments being made which try to take us off the mark about why we're here. And we go back to the appropriate role of the Congress and the appropriate role of the executive branch. So before we got a long way away from the comments about the hypothetical or imaginary things, I wanted to say we're dealing with reality here, correct? Yes. Is that right, both of you? I thank the gentlewoman.
Let me just say, I will tomorrow discuss, if we're going to spend any time on process, what the CRS has said. They said the agency's action is consistent with prior practice. And let me also add, the memorandum is real, so is the letter from the Secretary, the 20%.
If the gentleman deal, that was part of the confusion GAO cited, is that was not part of the information memorandum. That's an informal letter to the Congress. This is too important to do in sort of a sloppy, backhanded kind of way. So that's why we believe we need
She's
to
bound by what's in the letter.
It's not legally binding. It's
But
not
that-
following the procedures of
information
the
memo is-
Congressional Review Act.
Controlling time.
Yeah.
Mr. Andrews?
I would like to respond to what my friend from North Carolina described the GAO's legal opinion about this memorandum as a ruling. Of course, it's not. It's their legal opinion, a very valid legal opinion. There's a legal opinion from Congressional Research Service that disagrees with that. Obviously, the counsel to the Department of Health and Human Services disagrees with that. If, in fact, there's ever litigation over this, courts will decide whether the Secretary acted within her authority or not. I believe that she did. When the gentlelady says we want to deal with reality, I mean, I agree with her. And the reality is that mayors are laying off teachers and police and firefighters across the country, and we're not doing anything about it. The reality is that farmers have no idea under what rules they're going to be producing their crops and running their farms, and we're not doing anything about it. Reality is in 103 days we're going to have a tax increase on every American who pays income taxes and across-the-board cuts in our national defense and other key programs, and we're not doing anything about it. Yeah, the memo is real. The only thing I would say, and I would, with the gentlelady's permission, invite any of our friends on the other side to read to us the section of the memorandum that weakens the work requirement. That would be an interesting piece of reality.
You read the section, I believe, that strengthens it.
I did.
Great.
If the gentlewoman yield again, I actually can read something that would clarify what Mr. Andrews is asking.
In the actual document?
Not in the actual document,
Well,
but
I
it
think-
does
I think we
clarify.
want to confine it to the actual document, since that is where Mr. Andrews...
That's what the resolution's about.
What he read was what the document says. I think we need to stay with that.
Well, I think we'd all be very happy if we could stick with the documents and not talk about hypotheticals and imaginary. So if that's the standard we want to use, then I'm happy to do that. Let's stay with the documents then.
Oh, well, let's talk about another one then. Mr. Andrews, you mentioned the bill before your committee, WIA, it was called.
That's correct.
Do you remember the vote on it?
I don't remember the precise vote. All the
Committee vote or
It
subcommittee?
was a committee vote. All the Democratic members voted no, and all the Republican members present voted yes.
Never came to the floor.
It has not come to the floor, that's correct.
I want to ask unanimous consent, Madam Chair, to submit for the record a CRS report that demonstrates that the bill that Mr. Andrews has referred to does eliminate the work requirement. May I ask unanimous consent to submit that?
Without objection.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Mr. Bishop?
Does the Chair Pro Tem wish to read her part now?
I would be grateful.
I'll yield to you to do it.
Thank you. I'd like to share with you something that I had just read yesterday. Whoops, it went away. Uh-oh. Brandon, come here. I don't know how to find it on your thing. It just went away. Here we go. There are two paragraphs from a September 6 Washington Post op-ed by Robert Rector, who's a research fellow at Heritage. What is it that the administration's July guidance suddenly seeks to change? At the core of the 1996 law are participation rate requirements, those are in quotation marks, that ensure that 30 to 40% of able-bodied TANF recipients must engage in any of 12 different work activities for 20 to 30 hours per week. The administration would exempt states from this requirement, encourage them to operate under alternative performance measures. For example, HHS Secretary Sebelius has said that to bypass federal workfare requirements, a state would have to, quote, move at least 20% more people from welfare to work compared to the state's past performance. At first blush, a 20% increase in employment exits sounds impressive, but what does it mean? In the typical state, about 1.5% of the TANF caseload leaves the rolls each month because of employment. To be exempt from the federal work requirement, the state would have to raise that number to about 1.8% of caseload. This is a minuscule change. As the economy improves, the small increase will occur automatically in most states. Moreover, states keep imperfect employment records of those leaving TANF. Many states could easily achieve the required increase through modest improvements in record keeping alone. Therefore, I think, again, there's ample argument to say that this is a sort of a backhanded way of getting rid of those work requirements. And I'll make sure that we get the whole thing.
No.
It's Mr. Bishop's time.
So I yielded just for having it read, and that's the only purpose. I have only one other thing to say. As the only Westerner around here, it's Nevada. Nevada. There is no such place as Nevada. There is no Colorado anywhere. It's Colorado and Nevada, and I yield back.
There is a Nevada state, though, right? Yeah.
Mr. McGovern.
Oh, thank you very much. Look, I just want to echo what Ranking Member Slaughter and others have said about some of the unfinished business that this Congress has before it. And some of it is because the Senate is difficult to deal with, but some of it is because the House is not dealing with it. I sit on the Agriculture Committee. I'm not a big fan of the bill reported out because it cuts the SNAP program so deeply that it will negatively impact millions of people who depend on that program for food. But I want to get to the floor because I want to try to improve it. And I believe we need a farm bill, because there are farmers not only in rural America, but all throughout the country that are desperately looking for a long-term farm bill. And we ought to be dealing with that. Why we're not, I have no idea. But, you know, there are so many other things that are really important, that really are substantive, that matter in people's lives, that we could be dealing with, and we're dealing with this, which is essentially a bad Romney commercial. You know, I don't, you know, I think, one is we're going to do this tomorrow, and I don't know whether anyone picks it up or not. But I guess the point of this is to try to get a talking point for commercials, or for, you know, get something in the news. But I even think that the media is not even going to pay much attention to this, because it's so utter transparent in what it is. This is about politics, and you know, and we are wasting time. People are cynical about not just the Senate; they're cynical about the House, because they see this as a place where we debate trivial issues passionately, and important ones not at all. This is not the most important issue. This is not what we should be doing tomorrow. Now, we're in the minority, you're in control, so I have absolutely no questions, because there's nothing I can do about it, other than just to express my disappointment that with all that's happening in this country, with all the challenges, this is the best you can do. You gave away the week we would be here in October, so this is it, these 3 days this week, and this is it. A bill that going nowhere in the Senate, a bill that is not necessary. I think this is a waste of this House's time, and I wish we could put the politics behind us for a brief moment, and you know, even if you were, like I said, I have disagreements with the Farm Bill, but at least if we were dealing with that, that's substantive, that's real. We can debate our differences on the floor, but at the end of the day, we need a Farm Bill. We don't need this. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To say to my friend from Massachusetts, I think he misspoke when he said, let's deal with things that really matter. I know the gentleman, and I know he believes that helping families move from welfare to work really does matter. And dealing with these families, making sure that we get it right, really does matter. And
I was referring to this legislation. That's not that's what I was referring
and
to.
this legislation
this is a waste of our time.
That makes sure that we get it right.
This is a waste of our time.
That continues to enforce the congressional prerogative, which is valuable no matter who's in the White House.
This is a waste of our time.
As we talk about politics, and I don't know where it happens. It stops in the 112th Congress's watch, and it stops in the 113th Congress, no matter who's occupying the White House. But whenever the days came that we said, you know what? Doesn't really matter what they said back in 1787. Doesn't really matter who it is that's supposed to be handling these things. If it's a guy in the White House that we like, he can do whatever he wants. And if it's a guy in the White House we don't like, then everything he does is bad. That's the cynical politics that's taking place in this country. That's going on right now. This is important. Folks may not agree with it. We have 3 of the 4 members here at the dais voted for this bill in 1996. The only reason Mr. Klein didn't is because he wasn't here. If he had, I'm sure he would have been a supporter. But we have 3 folks who put their name beside this. And as I go back and read, and you can correct me, I serve on the Rules Committee. We don't look at these things until the end. I look at the committee report from Ways and Means, and they say this, going back to the committee print in November of 1996. They say in the section describing waivers under the new law, the summary says, quote, waivers granted after the date of enactment may not override provisions of the TANF law that concern mandatory work requirements. That from the very beginning, before the law had even gone into effect, it was the understanding of this Congress that the administration would not have the power to waive these work requirements. And because this has been characterized as again, in very cynical ways, which surprised me, because I think this is something on which generally parties have fair dealings. Let me ask you, Chairman Klein, if the administration came to the committee tomorrow and said, we believe the states have ideas to get more people out of welfare and into work than what the current framework allows us to do, will you on the committee work with us to provide states with more flexibility
to have more successful outcomes for American citizens. Is that a meeting you would take, or a meeting that you would say no?
I'm almost always happy to take a meeting, Mr. Woodhull. I think, though, that it's very clear in the law that you can't waive those work requirements. And so if you want to waive the work requirements, if you think that's necessary for flexibility, then we need to change the law.
Well, and that's my frustration, Mr. Chairman. I mean, to say that this is a waste of time because the administration wants to do it and the Congress says that's not what the law is, I would tell you that's a very important use of time. The waste of time was why it is the administration went off on something that I would expect would be a bipartisan priority. Mr. Camp, I know the kind of work you do in the Ways and Means Committee, and I do not believe that if states have ideas that flexibility that they could use to bring more people out of poverty and into production, that would not be an idea that you'd want to consider.
There was no consultation on this, and obviously that's something I'd welcome and work with. And just to go back to this other point, reading from the guidance where they say projects that test systematically extending the period in which vocational educational training or job search readiness programs count towards participation rates. That's the work requirement. This is where we believe this information memorandum weakens the work requirement. And even the Washington Post in their facts check says that the Democrats claim that this increases work requirements. They call it a stretch because it's not clear that the net result is that more people will end up working. That's the problem. That's why we need to make this clear. We need to move forward together on this. We need to work with the administration. If they believe there are real concerns about states and their flexibility and some innovative ideas, I'm ready to work with them to find out what those are.
Would you yield?
Be happy to use Mr. Levin.
I want to read a letter from the governor of Utah. This is dated July 16th, which was one of the reasons HHS acted. In discussions with HHS officials, Utah suggested that we be evaluated on the basis of the state's success in placing our customers in employment, while also using a full participation model. This approach would require some flexibility at the state level and the granting of a waiver. Utah made this request within the context of reauthorization of TANF programs in August of 2011, believing that current law would not allow such waiver authority. Now look, the 12 provisions in the welfare bill...
Could I interrupt you, Mr. Levin? I didn't hear that last sentence. Did you say he wrote the letter because he believed that the current law would not allow for such waivers?
Yes. However, based on recent information, the information memorandum, HHS appears to be granting waivers that will provide the flexibility we seek. Now, Mr. Rector's been mentioned here. He doesn't like some of the provisions that are in the law. He thinks, as I remember it, and I think he's restated it, that there is too much flexibility and that there is a provision, for example, so people can have training or education, and that would count towards work participation. We debated that in '96, and we decided to have those provisions because they would help people move from welfare to work. And what this governor suggested was not eliminating those provisions, but giving them some flexibility in terms of their implementation. That's what this is all about. So the main thing is to take this issue and say that the administration is trying to weaken the basic thrust, moving people from welfare to work, is for Pinocchios, is pants on fire. That's what this is really all about, to try to support and add that every independent checker says is something that is false.
I would respectfully...
That's what this is about.
I would disagree with you, Mr. Levin. I'd say what this is about is the erosion of trust that the American voter has in their government. And whether it's a Republican in the White House or a Democrat in the White House, it makes folks nervous when people unilaterally take control into their own hands. There is not a man or a woman that I know in this chamber who does not support getting more people from welfare back to work. And folks who would do extraordinary things to try to make that happen. And so to have the committee chairman practically begging to see that 20% requirement included in something other than an informal letter, to have folks practically begging to be consulted, or even better, being made a partner in trying to make this happen. Folks wonder why it is that we don't get anything done around here. This is something that folks agree on. And we could, I dare say, 435 of us could have done even better.
Tell that to the governor of Utah. He's the one who asked for this flexibility.
And I'm glad he is. Chris Christie was speaking to a group the other day. He said, you know, it's our job as governors to come to Congress and ask for stuff, and it's your job as Congress to tell us no. I happen to disagree with that when it comes to flexibility. I agree with it when it comes to asking for a blank check. I'm glad the governor's asking about flexibility. I'm glad to sit beside a member from the great state of Utah. And if you think for a moment, I believe that Rob Bishop and Chairman Klein and Chairman Camp and Mr. Andrews and yourself couldn't come up with a program that would be even more successful than informal guidance released on the fly that doesn't even include all the specifications from Health and Human Services. Again, this isn't a partisan issue. This is something that has eroded over time, and it's our responsibility to take it back. We may disagree on what the policy is here today, but we ought to be able to agree that the process was wrong and we can do better. And I don't care who's in the White House next time around. I hope that we will do better. I just want to make sure that I'm clear, Chairman Klein and Chairman Camp. We've heard so much of a discussion about state flexibility. Again, you weren't here, Chairman Klein, in that time, but if the administration would like to see more governors have more opportunity to bring more success to folks trying to move themselves from welfare to work, is that something the committee would be willing to work with the administration on and move through this Congress as all laws must do? Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much for taking your time to be here today for this. The hearing portion of HJRS 118. The bill that we were hearing for the Ways and Means Education and Workforce is now closed. I'd like to call up H.R. 3409 and the Coal Miner Employment and Domestic Energy Infrastructure Protection Act. Would like to have the gentleman, Mr. Hastings, Mr. Markey, Mr. Rush, and Mr. Whitfield to be our panel. And as always, welcome each of the four distinguished members who are before us, and without objection, recognize that they may have a written statement. We would allow that to be entered into the record and would recognize each of the members being for the Rules Committee. And at this time, I'd like to acknowledge the gentleman, Mr. Hastings, for
Thank you very much, and thank the members of the Rules Committee. H.R. 3409, the Stop the War on Coal Act, is a package of 5 bills, the majority of which have already passed the House, and is designed to end the Obama administration's war on coal. Title I of the bill is under the jurisdiction of the committee. I have the privilege to chair the Natural Resources Committee, and it's based on legislation authored by our colleague from Ohio, Mr. Johnson. It will prohibit the Secretary of the Interior from issuing regulations under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act over the next year that would adversely impact mining jobs and our economy. This prohibition is necessary due to the Obama administration's current efforts to rewrite the coal production regulation known as the 2008 Stream Buffer Zone Rule. The Natural Resources Committee is currently conducting an ongoing investigation into the unorthodox process of the administration's rewrite of that rule and its economic impacts. A draft analysis of their proposed new regulation that was obtained by the press, the Associated Press, shows that their new rewrite of this rule could cost 7,000 jobs and cause economic harm in 22 states. Now, the administration has failed to comply with documents, requests, and subpoenas from our committee, and they won't even release their final regulation that they are attempting to rewrite. The Obama administration's efforts to impose this rewritten regulation must be stopped in an open and transparent manner, and that is precisely what Title I does with this legislation, again, authored by our colleague from Ohio, Mr. Johnson. With that, I'll be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Ranking Member Slaughter, members of the committee. This Congress, Republican Congress, has already cast more than 300 anti-environmental votes. In our last week of session before the election in November, the majority is now planning to consider legislation on the floor that will add to that already unbelievable total. The legislative package you are considering consists of 5 separate sections, 4 of which are bills that have already passed the House and could not pass the Senate. It includes a coal ash title that endangers the health and safety of thousands of communities, provisions that would increase the levels of toxic mercury, lead, and cancer-causing toxins in our air and water, and provisions that gut the Clean Air Act. Why the House would waste precious time redebating these bills and voting on them once again is a mystery to me. It only underscores the fact that the House Republican majority is more focused on passing messaging bills than addressing the real issues and problems facing our nation. The remaining new title of this bill consists of a bill that was approved by the Natural Resources Committee back in February. It purports to halt an ongoing effort by the Obama administration to rewrite a midnight regulation adopted by the Bush administration on mountaintop removal mining. This Bush midnight mountaintop removal rule weakened a Reagan-era regulation by increasing the ability of mining companies to dump mining waste in streams. The Obama administration has signaled that it intends to revise the Bush administration regulation to better protect local communities, public health, and the environment. However, this effort is only in the very early stages, and the Obama administration has not even issued a proposed rule. That is why the Congressional Budget Office analysis of this language concluded that, quote, CBO expects that the bill would probably not affect any proposed regulations currently in the rulemaking process. In other words, Title I of this bill does absolutely nothing with respect to the sponsor's apparent target regulating of mountaintop removal mining. Moreover, the legislation is drafted so broadly that it is likely to cause collateral damage to other important rulemakings, according to the Interior Department. As drafted, Title I would prevent the Interior Department from issuing nearly any new regulation under the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act. This bill, therefore, would prevent the Interior Department from undertaking a number of actions that it is considering to ensure that mining operations are safe for workers and the environment, and that public health and American taxpayers are protected. Mr. Holt has filed an amendment to narrow the scope of this title, and I would urge the committee to make it in order. I have also filed an amendment to Title I that would allow the Secretary to take action if it would decrease the prevalence of birth defects and infant mortality or protect communities from grave and debilitating diseases such as lung cancer and heart disease. I would urge the committee to make this important amendment in order. I have filed a second amendment to ensure that we do not overturn the historic fuel efficiency gains that have been made by the Obama administration that will back out more than 3 million barrels of oil by the year 2030, save consumers the equivalent of $1 per gallon at the pump, and are supported by 13 auto companies, the environmental community, and the auto workers. I would ask that you put that amendment in order. And I have also submitted an amendment to establish a renewable electricity standard, building upon what the House has supported in the last 2 Congresses, that would ensure that we are pursuing a true all-of-the-above strategy to create jobs and lower energy prices. So that would be my request to you, and hopefully combined with an effort, hopefully that we could make to ensure that we do not allow for the elimination of the tax breaks for wind energy, which now has 100,000 employees in the United States, with the threat of 40,000 being laid off in the next 6 months if the tax protections are not kept on the book. I would hope that the committee would act in a way that allowed for a full debate out on the House floor. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My thanks to the chairman and ranking member of the Natural Resources Committee. Next, I'd like to go to Energy and Commerce representatives that we have. Chairman Whitfield.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Sessions and the rest of the members of the Rules Committee. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and speak briefly on the importance of H.R. 3409. Many people have asked us, well, why are you bringing this up now? Because many of these pieces of legislation have already passed. And there's a couple of reasons why. Number one, over the last 5-6 months, more and more coal mines have been closing down around the country. As a matter of fact, in today's paper, it was announced that Alpha Coal is closing down 8 mines, 1,200 jobs will be lost. Patriot Coal in my district and operating also in Illinois is in bankruptcy. Murray Coal up in Ohio, that also does business in Kentucky and Indiana, announced that they were shutting down 3 or 4 mines. And then there have been some court decisions that affect aspects of some of the bills that we passed earlier. So this legislation is designed to simply provide a more balanced look at coal. I would be the first to admit that, yes, low natural gas prices makes it more difficult for coal to compete. But some of these regulations out of EPA that this bill is designed to correct would make it impossible for coal to compete. Now, President Obama, when he was running for president, in a speech in San Francisco, made the comment that if he's elected president, yes, you would be able to build a coal mine, but it would go into bankruptcy, that we would bankrupt it. And EPA has been overly zealous, so Mr. Hastings has already discussed Title I. I'll just take a few brief moments to talk about Title II through 5. Title II simply prevents EPA from finalizing the greenhouse gas regulation, but it certainly would not affect the CAFE 1 standard or renewable fuels or some other aspects that it relates to. But if the greenhouse gas regulation becomes final, you will not be able to build a new coal-powered plant in America because there is no technology available to meet the emission standards. And they even changed the way they measure standards in the greenhouse gas regulation. So that's one thing it would do. Number two, Title III is what we refer to as the TRAIN Act. It simply requires the Department of Commerce to lead an interagency committee within government to complete an analysis of 5 or 6 regulations coming out of EPA to simply look at the impact on jobs in America, the impact on the global competitiveness of the U.S., energy prices, energy reliability, and what the benefits might be. And I don't think that anyone would object to doing a cumulative analysis, having the agency and the government to look at that, because particularly at this time in our nation's history when we're trying to stimulate the economy, sometimes overregulation creates obstacles. So that's the second thing that it does. It also, and without getting into a lot of details about it, it makes utility MACT, it asks EPA to go back and revisit that issue. That applies to existing coal plants. And it also reinstates the cross-state air pollution rule because the courts recently invalidated EPA's new standards on the cross-state air pollution rules. Title IV, as the gentleman from Massachusetts mentioned, refers to coal ash. All this bill does is it establishes a minimal federal requirement for the management disposal of coal ash. States already regulate coal ash. And so the federal criteria would be administered by the states through enforceable permits and by EPA if a state failed to meet those requirements. All of you know coal ash has been used in this country for many, many years to build highways and other uses. And then the final title relates to the Clean Water Cooperative Federalism Act, which our committee really does not have jurisdiction over, but it simply restricts EPA's ability to override or delay a state's permitting and water quality certification under the Clean Water Act once EPA has already approved a state program. So in my view, this is a simple, common sense piece of legislation that tries to restore some balance in an important part of the energy needs of America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, my dear friend, Mr. Rush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Chairman, we look toward the end of this development Congress. I understand that we're sitting here engaging in a red line of a whole show that did not really earn any box office attention. That has been totally repudiated by the world public. Mr. Chairman, this now, right now, is a hodgepodge of failed legislation that should not see the light of day, and is so flawed that it's almost ridiculous that you are allowing us to waste your time and the time of the of this committee to even be entertaining this bill. The House Republicans claim that H.R. 3419 is a necessary bill in order to stop the war on coal. And this would be an appropriate name for the bill regarding America's war on coal. Mr. Chairman, this morning is speaking the nation. There were cornerstone environmental statutes and awakening protections for the public's health. This H.R. 3419 brings together five of the most anti-environmental bills of the 112th Congress into one horrendous, horrible, and environmentally disastrous piece of legislation. It's almost the Frankenstein of legislation for this Congress. And the authors of this bill remind me of Dr. Frankenstein and William Chesterton Road in his list as far as the letters are concerned. The titles have been discussed, but Title I blocks the Department of the Interior from protecting streams from the harmful effects of coal mining. Title II exempts the Clean Water Act and block critical rules for cleaning up the various power plants. Title III will eliminate controls on carbon pollution. Title IV will loosen requirements for the safe disposal of coal ash. And Title V will exempt the Clean Water Act. Mr. Chairman, in some cases, House Republicans failed to hold hearings to discuss the impact of the bill's most egregious provisions, many of which have nothing to do with coal. Coal isn't even the subject of some of these acts. Just give me some examples. H.R. 3419 nullifies no tailpipe standards, which which were intended to make vehicles more efficient and less polluting. What's that got to do with coal? What's coal got to do with this? The law blocks EPA from setting air quality standards based on sound science. What's coal got to do with this? H.R. 3409 overturns the EPA's scientific finding that greenhouse gas emissions threaten public health and welfare. What's coal got to do with this? The bill repeals a congressional requirement that oil refineries and chemical plants disclose their pollution. What's coal got to do with this? And the bill eliminates EPA's ability to ensure adequate water quality standards. Again, what's coal got to do with this? This is a diabolical bill. In an attempt to codify an array of erroneous Republican assertions that ignore science, pretend that climate change is a hoax, and roll back the progress that this nation and its people have made under the Clean Air Act. We have a distinguished individual, Mr. Chairman, and that's to protect the public health and not put industry, profits, and political points above all else, as this bill is intended to do. Mr. Chairman, I hope that this committee, strongly urge this committee to support it as a whole, so that amendments may be offered to improve and try to make this the expanded piece of legislation something that is tenable and something that may reflect the problems that we are seeing in our nation today.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Rush. We appreciate your being here. I have no questions. Mr. Sessions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hastings, I know it's been a few minutes since you've spoken, but you really spoke, I think, clearly about why we're here, the importance of what we're here. It's a jobs saver and jobs creator. Could you just run that by me one more time, sir?
What we are about in this country, and I think what most American people are concerned about, are where are the jobs. And there's a sector of our economy where we have a tremendous potential that we're not utilizing, in my view, and that's the energy sector, and particularly the energy sector on public lands. We've discussed that in other areas. Because it has a twofold benefit. Number one, it creates jobs, and those are generally good-paying jobs. And when you have good-paying jobs, that means that the economy grows, and that means revenues come into the federal government. That means you avoid some of the issues that have been talked about here earlier. It also has, there's a national security issue to it. There is so much volatility. We don't, you can open the paper any day and see the volatility in certain parts of the world. And we get a lot of our energy from those parts of the world. It is in our best interest to become less dependent on foreign energy. This addresses at least one aspect of it, coal. And I might add, the potential we have for coal in this country is huge and will last for hundreds of years, is the last estimate that I've seen. For us to ignore that resource doesn't make sense. And one of the reasons that we are here is because of the frustration that my committee has had with a total rewrite of a new method of mining coal. It took the Bush administration 5 years to come up with a rewrite of this rule. They went through the proper procedure. Right after this administration took office, they completely negated it and started a rewrite, which of course they haven't made public. We've had to subpoena them for information. We haven't gotten the information, but we do know this. A preliminary report that was leaked to the press, didn't come to us, stated that the contractor that was hired by the department to look at the consequences of this new rewrite would cost 7,000 jobs and affect 22 states. Interior fired that contractor because apparently of that coming up with that conclusion. Now, we've tried to get that information, but that's the frustration we have. I guess the bottom line is it is about jobs, it is about energy sector jobs, and that's what this bill addresses.
I suspect you're also here, along with Chairman Whitfield, because one of the first bills that we passed in this Congress said, please go back and review rules and regulations that are inhibiting jobs, job growth, job creation, and full employment. And I would suspect that that's another reason why you're here, because a mandate of this House of Representatives is to work with this administration on finding a way to save the jobs we have and add to them. So I applaud both of you for being here today, picking up the pace, not only about jobs that you have that's within your jurisdiction, but working hard for people who might not be in your state, but who need a shot at helping provide our American economy the security that it needs also. So I want to thank both of you for being here, and your colleagues that joined you also. I yield back my time.
Everybody, just a few minutes. As I said, I have a question to Slaughter.
The only way I think I could describe this afternoon would be fiddling while Rome burns. Just to think about everything that's been undone, and we've come back in here to rediscuss 4 bills that have passed already. And another one, the first bill that we passed here dealt with an issue that really was not genuine, and it had a solution to something that wasn't even a problem. And, I have to reiterate that, we're in a serious problem here in this country. I have farmers that are desperate to find out what in the world we're going to do here for a farm bill, and we're not even going to talk about it. Everybody knows the fiscal cliff is looming right over us, and I mentioned my personal concern that the Violence Against Women Act has not been reauthorized, and I consider that to be a real breach. But we got so many bills we could work on to repass bills here. I'm about to go home, but as Mr. McGovern said, we can't do a thing about it. We don't do the agenda here. I would like unanimous consent, if I may have it, to put into the record the statement of administration policy and read 2 sentences from it.
Without objection, the statement will be included in the record in its entirety.
This is from the administration. To be clear, the administration believes that coal is and will remain an important part of our energy mix for decades to come. For that reason, since 2009, the administration has committed nearly $6 billion in advanced coal research, development, and deployment, and continues to work with industry on important efforts to demonstrate advanced coal technologies. The idea this administration has ignored coal simply won't wash. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions.
Before you all leave, I'd like to say that I just got an urgent bulletin that came in informing me that today is Mr. Scott's birthday, and so I want to extend birthday greetings to Mr. Scott. We're very happy we have our full complement, at least on our side here, and so very, very happy birthday, and happy to recognize the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize some guests that I have in the room today. Mr. and Mrs. John Woodard and their son John Woodard are here, Joan and John, and they've spent the day visiting the Capitol. Young John is working on his Citizen in the Nation badge, Citizenship in the Nation badge.
Boy Scout would know that.
And is working his way toward becoming an Eagle like Mr. Sessions, and I'd like to welcome them.
Well, congratulations, and I will say that certainly having to sit through a Rules Committee meeting deserves several merit badges, so I congratulate you for that. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for being here, and now we will go to our final 2 witnesses, Messrs. Langford and Boswell. Gentlemen, please come forward. Without objection, any prepared statement that you have will appear in the record in its entirety. Please come forward. Please come forward. And your statements will appear in the record. We welcome a summary, and we hope to complete this before we go into vote. So please proceed. Mr. Boswell.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have 2 amendments. Where do I go first? Guide me. Mr. Chairman, which one do I go first? I have 2 amendments. Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, and thank all of you for giving us this opportunity. I first is the amendment to extend the production tax credit. I just enjoyed the discussion that Mr. Sessions had with the panel before, and this is something that will certainly promote jobs and activity and get us less reliant on foreign oil, if you will, and on it goes. And it's a very big impact on the economy. In fact, Mr. Sessions, your state as well as mine and many others, wind. We have 7 different companies in Iowa that are producing blades and turbines, and just heard yesterday, because of the uncertainty, they're going to lay off 400 people. And I understand that the rest will follow suit. It's very important. National Government Association, and the list goes on and on, those that would support us extending that for the 4 years that I'm requesting. So that's the essence of it. If you like more details, we can go into it, but
very much.
It seems like this is the last opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Go ahead. The other one has to do with, we've heard discussion on and on and on about the importance of the Farm Bill. And it seems to me like the opportunities are getting very close to stopping in this session, and so I thought, well, maybe there's a chance before this committee,
Neil,
if you would take this opportunity to respond to what we're hearing across the country from everybody, seems to me, to put the Senate bill out in front of us, and let's discuss it, debate it, amend it, do whatever we want, and get the thing to conference, and let's see what we can do.
Thank you.
It has a tremendous impact on my producers, our processors. All of us have a vested interest in what goes on in agriculture. We all eat, and we get something back. I don't care if you live downtown New York or wherever, Los Angeles, who knows, because everybody has 3 big things because they're vested interest, and that's plentiful, safe, least expensive food in the world, and we need to protect them.
Thank you very much. Mr. Langford.
You also have an amendment that you'll have listed Rick Berg and several other names that are on it. He could not be here today. It is definitely coal-related, deals with the regional haze requirements. As many of you know, in 1970, the Clean Air Act allowed for citizen suits to happen. In 2009, January 2009, several environmental groups sued the EPA, trying to expand the authority of those citizen suits, dealing with regional haze specifically. Regional haze is a state issue because it doesn't deal with health. It only deals with visibility. It's not health-related at all, so it was given primacy to make decisions on that in the state. The way the citizen suit was agreed to in a consent decree with the federal courts, it changed that rule from the state having primacy to the EPA having primacy. That is obviously a change in law that occurred through a federal court and through a consent decree rather than a change through Congress on that. And so this amendment begins to push back and say states, again, have primacy to be able to make decisions dealing with regional haze. Since it is not a health issue, it is only a visibility issue. It also clarifies it deals with a specific location, not multiple locations. If we have visibility issues in a location, then that's the location that's evaluated.
Thank you very much, Mr. Langford. Any questions for these witnesses? Yes, Mr. Bishop.
Mr. Langford, I appreciate your amendment very much. As you're talking about the consent decree that was made, what you're telling me, this was not adjudicated in the court, it was simply settled out of court with a decree.
That is correct. Multiple environmental groups sued the EPA. The EPA said they would settle out of court with them. None of the parties that are affected were brought in, and the consent decree was signed off on by a federal judge just saying these 2 groups have agreed to something but didn't agree to the policy of it.
So there was no adjudication?
There's no adjudication of this at all.
Thank you. Mr. Woodall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point out that of all the folks who have co-sponsored this amendment, my freshman colleague waited through 90 minutes to be here to testify on it. I hope we'll make that amendment in order, Mr. Chairman.
There are a tremendous number of jobs and a lot of electricity bills that are about to go up because of this.
So he deserves a merit badge too then, so thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much, gentlemen. We appreciate your being here. That will conclude the hearing for consideration of the measure, and distribute the rule. And Chair recognizes the gentleman from Dallas for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move Committee grant H.J. Res. 118, a joint resolution providing congressional disapproval of waiver of work requirements to close rural Rule provides 1 hour debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Ways and Means and the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Education and the Workforce. Rule waives all points of order against consideration of the joint resolution. Rule provides that the joint resolution shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the joint resolution. The rule provides one motion to recommit. Section 2 of the resolution provides for consideration of H.R. 3409, the Coal Miner Employment and Domestic Energy Infrastructure Protection Act, under a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour general debate equally divided among and controlled by the chairs and ranking minority members of the Committees on Natural Resources, Energy and Commerce, and Transportation Infrastructure. The rule weighs all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order an amendment in the nature of a substitute consistent of the text of Rules Committee Print 112-32 as original text for purpose of amendment, and provides that it shall be considered as read. Rule waives all points of order against the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Rule makes an order only those amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to an amendment, shall not be subject to demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instruction. Section 3 of the resolution provides that on any legislative day during the period from September 22, 2012 through November 12, 2012, the journal of the proceedings of the previous day shall be considered as approved. The chair may adjourn the House to meet at a date and a time within the limits of Clause 4, Section 5, Article 1 of the Constitution. The bills and resolutions introduced shall be numbered, listed in the congressional record, and when printed shall bear the date of introduction but may be referred at a later time. Section 4 of the resolution authorizes the Speaker to appoint members to perform the duties of the chair for the duration of the period addressed by Section 3. Section 5 of the resolution provides that each day during the period addressed by Section 3 shall not constitute a calendar day for the purpose of Section 7, the War Powers Resolution. Section 6 of the resolution provides that each day during the period addressed by Section 3 shall not constitute a legislative day for the purpose of Clause 7, Rule 13. Finally, Section 7 of the resolution provides that each day during the period addressed by Section 3 shall not constitute a calendar or legislative day for the purpose of Clause 7C1 of Rule 22.
You've heard the motion, gentlemen. Let me just say at the outset, those items at the end, by virtue of this being the last meeting, we hope, before we adjourn to the election, we want to ensure that we take care of those items. We provide for a closed rule to preserve the privilege of the resolution in the Senate under the Congressional Review Act, and we will divide the time between the two committees of jurisdiction. And for the coal package, we have a structured rule in which we make roughly an equal number of Republican and Democratic amendments in order. It's 13-7 Republican, 6 Democratic amendments, and the amendments that were not made in order, most were non-germane. Many of them were non-germane. And so I'll see if there are any amendments to the rule. Ms. Slaughter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 3409 and H.J. Res. 118 each an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bills on the floor.
Vote occurs on the Slaughter amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The noes have it.
Roll call, please.
Clerk, call the roll.
No.
Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox? Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall? Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent? Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott? Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster? Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter?
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern? Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings? Mr. Polis? Mr. Chairman?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Mr. Clerk, the total?
2 yeas, 8 nays.
And the amendment is not agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Yes,
Ms. Slaughter?
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 3409 by Representative Boswell, number 10, which would insert the text of the bipartisan farm bill passed by the Senate. Mr. Chairman, the farm bill expires at the end of this month. We have a drought in more than half the country. Farmers are struggling. There are small businesses, too, and they can't afford the uncertainty that the farm bill expiration will create. The Senate passed a bipartisan farm bill. The House Agricultural Committee has also voted to report a bipartisan farm bill. And the first time in the history of the Congress, it has, ag bill reported out of Congress has failed to go to the floor. So I move that we grant waivers and allow the Boswell amendment.
The vote occurs on the Slaughter Amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Being the chair, the noes have it, the noes have it.
Roll call, please.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. No. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern. Aye. Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Mr. Clerk, the total?
2 yeas, 8 nays.
And the amendment's not agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Yes,
Ms.
Mr.
Slaughter.
Chair. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 3409 by Representative Moore, number 25, which would add the Senate-passed version of the Violence Against Women Act to the end of this bill. The authorization for programs under the Violence Against Women's Act has expired. Who here wants to go home and explain to women in their district that politics kept us from reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, which has helped millions of victims of abuse across the country and has always, up until now, been reauthorized in a bipartisan way?
Vote occurs on the Slaughter Amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those
Aye.
opposed, no. Being the chair, the noes have it.
Roll call,
Clerk, call the
please.
roll.
Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk, total?
2 yeas, 8
The
nays.
amendment's not agreed to. Are there further amendments? Ms. Slaughter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 3409 by Mr. Levin, number 27, which is the Middle Class Tax Cut Act. The middle class is about to see their tax rates go up, and that will be disastrous for American families as well as the American economy as a whole. Everyone has signed off on keeping taxes right where they are for the middle class except the House Republicans. It's unconscionable. Holding middle-class tax cuts and the fragile economic recovery both hostage till you get a tax cuts for the wealthiest couple of percent of people in the country is outrageous. This is our last chance before elections to put the middle-class tax cut on the floor and send it to the President, and I urge an aye.
Vote occurs on the Slaughter Amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those
Aye.
opposed, no. Being the
Roll
chair, the
call,
noes have it.
please.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. No. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Mr. Clerk, the total?
2 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to. There are further amendments. Mr. McGovern.
Just 3 quick amendments, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendments to H.R. 3409 by Mr. Blumenauer, number 24, and Mr. Boswell, number 21, both of which would extend the production tax credits for renewable energy projects until 2017.
You've heard the motion, gentlemen. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed,
That's
no.
for roll call.
Madam Chair, the noes have it.
That's for roll call.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Mr. Clerk, the total?
2 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendment's not agreed to. Mr. McGovern.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment to H.R. 3409 by Mr. Connolly, number 19, which would insert the text of S. 1789, the 21st Century Postal Service Act of 2012.
Vote occurs on the McGovern Amendment. Those in favor will say
Aye.
aye. Those opposed, no.
That's for a roll call, Mr. Chairman.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk, total?
2 yeas, 8
Amendment
nays.
not agreed to. Mr. McGovern.
One final amendment. I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the following amendments to H.R. 3409. Connolly, number 20. DeFazio, number 2. Deutsch, number 4. Holt, number 17. Tonko, number 3.
Vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pin the chair. The noes have it. Noes. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter. Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Mr. Clerk, the total?
2 yeas, 8
And
nays.
the amendment's not agreed to. No further amendments. The vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pin the chair. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Mr. Bishop, clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions.
Aye.
Mr. Sessions, aye. Ms. Fox.
Yay.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Slaughter. Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern. Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Polis. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Chairman, aye.
Clerk, the total?
8 yeas, 2 nays.
And the motion is agreed to. And Mr. Bishop will be managing for the majority, and Ms. Slaughter for the minority. Let me just say that we're hoping very much that this is the last Rules Committee meeting during what Adam and I discussed as the vibrant duck session. We will look forward to convening after the election and certainly wish everyone well. Without objection, the committee stands adjourned.